Go.
Welcome everyone to the first webinar of the PCDN Career Series in 2018. And I know it's May 30th and we're saying the first webinar. And we do not have excuse, but we sort of have a story. And it's that PCDN, a lot of you have learned, moved from Washington, D.C. to South America and Medellin. And the topic, as I was telling a few of you, is a little bit hard, the future of work, but also we've been having a huge transition. So our apologies for not having this webinar before, but we're in for a treat. And by the way, my name, for those of you who have never seen me, my name is Catalina Rojas, and I will introduce my colleague, also my spouse, and my partner in change. Should I say? I was going to say partner in crime, and that's not appropriate. Dr. Craig Selliser, who is also founder and CEO of PCDN. I am Dr. Catalina Rojas, and I'm delighted to have everyone of you here. As I said, PCDN Career Series for 2018 was a challenge. And we decided to be one of the pioneer organizations talking about the future of work in its implications in the field of social change. So we're opening this year's webinar late and everything, but we couldn't open with the best person. And it's someone that is trained as an engineer, and Craig is going to give the proper introduction of Robert Smeda, but he also works at one of the leading cutting-edge technology companies, and we are going to have an encounter of geeks and social change makers, because we are the Peace and the Collaborative Development Network, which means collaboration is our style, and we don't believe that there should be a divide between geeks and change makers. In fact, we need to work together and understand together. And in addition to this webinar, I will close by saying that this week, the Career Series is also putting and publishing a blog post about or entitled "How Geeks." I ruined it.
How geeks can speak social good.
How geeks can speak social good and how change makers can speak geek. Something like that. But we hope you read it. We hope you enjoy this webinar. And I'm going to leave you with Craig so that he introduced himself for a second and probably said all the things that I forgot that I was supposed to say.
Yes.
And welcome, Rob.
Yes. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm Craig Selliser from PCDN. Just to go a little bit over the structure for this is we'll do a quick introduction to Robert and also just where people are zooming in from. So we're delighted to have people literally from around the world. Robert will do a short presentation, just kind of talking about some of the key topics, and he has so much wisdom and experience. And then it'll just be open questions and discussion for as long as people want. I mean, not going on for 24 hours, but within the hour. At any time, if you have a question, you can go to the bottom of your screen, zoom over the chat button, and chat it in or type it in, or you could turn on your video or your mic. We keep everyone muted just to avoid background noise, but if you want to do that, you can call in. So in terms of our career series, you can find a whole bunch of blogs for this year. As Catalina said, another one's going up today. Our next webinar for the career series is going to be sometime in the second week of June. So we're finalizing a date. It's going to be on blockchain. So our goal is this year to talk about all these terms that people hear in the news. What in the world does this mean? Like, what in the world is machine learning, artificial intelligence, and what is the blockchain, which is different than Bitcoin, but we can talk about that. So we're going to have one of the world's leading experts who actually is based in Colombia, in Cali, who's working on kind of the front lines of blockchain for social change and is an amazing expert and does a lot of work with institutions around the world. So, every month just pay attention and hopefully we'll learn as much as you do. And we're going to be doing lots of other topics. And so for Robert,
what's this webinar about?
This webinar is on the future of work and social change, and what we're really talking about is kind of the emerging technologies and processes of machine learning, automation, artificial intelligence, and like what in the world do these things mean? How are they potentially being used or will be used, and how does that connect to social change work? So Robert Smeda has an BS in computer science from Miami University. And he can tell you where that's located. I think it's actually in Ohio, even though it's called Miami University. Maybe you can explain that. He's finishing an MS in computer science from the Georgia Institute of Technology, specializing in machine learning. He's working as a software development engineer at Amazon and working on Alexa, which you can ask him what it is, but it's basically like, it's one of the kind of speaker automated systems that you can interact with. And he previously worked at Wells Fargo, focused on foreign exchange markets. So you can tell there's a lot of financial software and development experience. He has a strong passion for technology and how data can impact our lives, and he's done work with Engineers Without Borders, which is a great network of engineers trying to use their tools for kind of social impact and social good. I will also point out that Jordan, who is married to Robert, is a wonderful PCDN team member, and who knows a lot about social change and also a decent amount about kind of topics we're talking about. In terms of where people are calling in from, so we have India, Aishwara, we have Natalie from Germany, from Berlin, Robert from Seattle, us from Colombia, Harrisonburg, Virginia, from Wasim, Elizabeth, New Jersey, and I think other people. So at any time, please put in the chat box where you're calling in from, and any questions you have. And this session is being recorded, so I don't think we're going to say anything super controversial. But if at some point you make a comment that you later regret, whether it's Robert or ourselves, or you ask a question and you prefer that not be shared with the world, just drop us a note.
We'll respect that.
So if you say a certain something that will influence your career negatively, just let us know. So we're going to turn it over to Robert now, and thank you so much for making time.
Thank you, Robert.
Feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Again, my name is Robert Smeda, and I have some PowerPoint.
I think we're, Robert, I think we're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So I'm not sure if it's.
Maybe I'll just unplug my headphones, but let me.
Maybe take the headphones off.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, much better.
Okay, perfect. We'll give this a try. Let me know if, again, there's like background noise or echoes, and I can figure out another thing. But as I was saying, my name is Robert Smeda, and I have some PowerPoint slides. Let's see if I get these guys going. And can everyone see it? Let's see. Yeah, okay, cool, Craig. I see you shaking your head. All right, so the future of work. So my name is Robert Smeda. I work at Amazon. I work on Alexa's personality. And so when you think of Alexa's personality, that's thinking about the things that she does to delight you. And again, Craig kind of gave you an overview of what Alexa is. It's, in the simplest form, it's a little cylinder that you can say, Alexa, tell me a joke. And then she will, spout out something hopefully really funny.
I'm not sure about that.
And I'm not sure if you heard, but I have one at home. She just said something. So yeah, that's what I work on. I work on Alexa's personality. And then before we get started, I have to, put out the little blurb. The views that I express during this presentation are of my own and not of my employer, obviously. So the future of work. So the way we'll get started is we're going to cover kind of the high level, what are these different technology buzzwords. And so what is artificial intelligence? Over the past few years, AI has made incredible progress, from both self-driving cars to artificial intelligence that can actually generate music and compositions that are indistinguishable from humans. And so diving into this a little bit more, let me get the button, there we go. So what is AI? In Hollywood and numerous sci-fi novels, you tend to think of AI as this all-powerful being that knows everything. And in reality, I'm sure, as we all know, it's much simpler and it's much humbler. And at the root of it, AI is intelligent behavior in an autonomous agent. And so truly, AI is your Roomba, or your little vacuum cleaner that cleans your house autonomously. Just a robot cleaning your house. Its intelligent behavior is just picking up after you. And another way to think about AI is like the brain, but not the body. And so AI does not necessarily equal robotics. Robotics is, I guess, the body, and then AI is the brain. And so AI of today can do very specific things, driving a car, booking meetings, picking your next Netflix binge. And the future of AI is leading towards something more advanced. And that's generally called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And this is when an AI can do something that is indistinguishable from a human behavior. And so that's when you talk, over the phone to someone, and you never realize that you're talking to a robot. And a really recent and good example of this is called Google Duplex. And if you have a chance, take some time out of your day and watch the YouTube video. It's called Google Duplex. And they basically just showcase what it looks like to have a robot make an appointment for you or make a reservation for you. And the operator on the other end had no idea. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And then to dive into different fields of AI and a couple buzzwords. So machine learning. So machine learning and AI are not the same. Machine learning is an instrument of artificial intelligence. And machine learning, it's the ability for an algorithm to learn from prior data in order to produce a behavior. So machine learning is teaching a machine to make decisions in situations they have not seen before. And then the most mainstream approach to machine learning is showing an algorithm a data set of situations and telling it what the right decision is. This is also called training a model. So a really good metaphor to not get into too many of the vocab words, a really great metaphor is when you're learning to play like an instrument or a trumpet, for example, you learn the different finger positions. And so you're training yourself or training the model by learning different finger positions. And then you experiencing new, interactions when you're playing with other people, or maybe you're playing at a different tempo. You've maybe have never played at that tempo before, but since you've previously trained yourself or trained your model, you're able to execute the task correctly. So at a high level, that's what machine learning is, where you basically pump a whole bunch of data into a machine and then let it experience new foreign situations. And then taking one step deeper, it's called deep learning. This is kind of one of the reasons why machine learning, AI, this is kind of the nucleus of why everyone's talking about this. So in the 80s and 90s, we really didn't have the computational power to do this sort of technology, do this sort of learning. And so let me talk a little bit about deep learning. So deep learning is a branch of machine learning. And I may get a little too deep, so feel free to stop me if I do. So this is where artificial neural networks find patterns in raw data. In a way, it's simulating how neurons react in the brain. The more neurons or layers there are, the better the neural network's ability to learn. And so let me take a step back and kind of unpack some of that. So basically what will happen is you have a node where data will come into this node, and then it's going to either say, oh, it's green, it's the color green, and then it's going to shoot out to the other nodes. And then all of these nodes are interconnected, and they produce an output. The really interesting part of this is at a certain point, it's really, we as humans can't understand it. Very similar to how we don't necessarily fully understand how our brain works. Sometimes when we build these deep learnings or artificial neural networks, they're just so complex and so deep that it's near impossible to understand. And so to give you an example of what deep learning is used for, and it's very common, it's identifying faces. And so you have your brand new iPhone. How in the world does this iPhone know that it's your face when you unlock it and use the unlock screen? So the first thing that it does is the program takes your picture and transforms it all into pixels. So that's what the first layer does. The next layer comes up with the concept of edges. And so if you think about it, my face is some sort of edges. And so the next layer identifies what, just one straight edge is. And then these layers just keep building on top of each other. And maybe it'll develop what a curve is and what, a mouth is and what a nose is. And then eventually all of these different layers are layered on top of each other. And then it'll be able to say yes or no, like this is Robert Smeda's face. And so that's at a high level what deep learning is. And another popular example of deep learning is Go, which is I believe it originated in Asia. It's a board game. Google just recently defeated the Go champion, and that was big news in my realm, at least. And they use deep learning to beat the greatest Go master there is.
Could you get a little closer to the microphone? Because sometimes the sound goes a little bit, maybe because we have a major construction. Maybe.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, I'll try to.
Would you like all questions to be at the end, or if someone has a question about one?
Yeah. So the view that I have, I unfortunately can't see the chat box. So let me see if I can.
You should be able to click on it. If anyone has questions, feel free to just put them in the chat box, now or at any time during. I think because you're sharing your screen, you probably can't see the chat box, so we'll pay attention to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one question for the deep neural learning is you have to set up the condition. So you have to set up like the architecture where it's bounded, but can it go beyond that architecture?
Yeah. So the really interesting thing about deep learning is you don't necessarily have to set up anything. So what it does is you give it raw data, and then it'll just start finding patterns. And so if I took a picture of myself right now, they may find the pattern of this black shirt that I'm wearing, and then they may it may become very attached to this black shirt. But that's why you are right. There are some conditions that you set to try to help direct where the learning goes. And so in this case, I may say, look for, actually what would end up happening is I would just give it multiple pictures of myself eventually, where I'd be wearing, different shirts. And so the learning would learn not to attach itself to this black shirt. It would attach itself to the edges of my face or the things that I normally wear based on 50 pictures that I may submit to this neural network.
And just one other quick question: where does this live? So does someone build this on like a laptop and it sits on a server, or has to have like huge computing power? So somehow you have to create it so it exists. But where does it actually sit? In the cloud, like on multiple servers? Like how do you explain to someone where this massive data is being fed into and where it's being processed?
Yeah, so typically the life cycle of these models is the training time can take anywhere from a couple hours to maybe even a couple weeks. And then once the model is generated, it's very easy just to send in new pieces of data. And so the model itself may be small enough to even fit on your phone. It may be a couple kilobytes, which is very, very small. And then to just use a already created model would be just like just like clicking a button. That's how simple it would be. But as far as generating the model itself, that can take a lot of time, and that's kind of what the roadblock was, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and that's kind of why it's becoming a thing now. Is because now we have so much computational power that this is, attainable and, usable in our life. So
I think you can go ahead. We'll check if there's any questions.
Perfect. Yeah. So going on to what does this mean and why do you care? So first off, this should be viewed as an exciting thing, and much like some other worldly inventions like cars, the printing press, these things have changed how we interact, how we communicate, how we live our lives, and artificial intelligence, while it's not there right now, it's definitely the beginnings of it. And then that's the next point I really want to point out is we are not there. And so when you read CNN articles and things like that saying you're going to lose your job next year, I don't think that's going to happen. Just on my experience, we are not close to the reckoning or the job apocalypse. I would say if I were to put a number, probably at least 20 years before we see anything significant. And in reality, it's not going to be a flip of a switch. It's going to be a gradual change. And that's mainly because all these artificial intelligence all these, I guess, models are being created by individual companies. And of course, to use these models, someone has to pay these companies. And so there's no, I guess, open source or free version that everyone can adopt at a flip of a switch. And so it'll definitely be a phased approach. And something else to keep in mind is this sort of fear that you see sometimes in the media where, job loss is going to be prevalent, has happened before. In the 20s and the 50s, this sort of, it's a very common fear that, everyone believes in. And even myself, with the media and fiction, robots are going to take over the world. It's a very easy thing to sell. And then, so what can you do to stay relevant or maybe even, avoid, potential job loss? Well, first think of, is your job something, or I guess another way to think about it is, what are robots bad at? Robots are at talking to people, communicating, cooperating. So the soft skills are highly, highly valuable, and that's something you should continue to invest in. Presentation skills, motivating others, those sort of skills are very hard to simulate. So definitely invest in those. I'm also a proponent of education. I don't think you can necessarily have too much education. Definitely take some time to try to understand some of the technology that's going on around you. So like joining this webinar is a great example of you going outside your comfort zone and learning something you may not know a lot about. Continuing to do this will help. And then really the most important thing, and why I was excited to come talk with everyone here today, this audience is, social change advocates. And right now there is no legislation, there is no laws saying, when autonomous cars become 100% things, what happens to all those workers? Like we need, great minds to think of social programs or, things to get people from point A to point B, like once they lose their, truck driving jobs. And so this audience, the social change audience, I feel has a great opportunity to really change our world and get us to a point where we can sustainably live life. And that may be, thinking of shorter work weeks or maybe different innovative ideas that this audience is very, very well positioned to address. So yeah, that's what this means to you, and that's why I'm really excited to be here. And then the last thing I have is just a little history of how technology has changed jobs. And actually, Craig sent me this article a little bit ago, and I thought this graph was really cool to see. And so all the way on the left, it starts out in 1850. And as you can see, probably I'd say maybe 60 to 70% of people were farmers. And that's what everyone was doing back in 1850. And then as we progressed, we became more manufacturing based. And then now you can kind of see manufacturing, agriculture, and mining are all down. But then all of this service-driven economy has increased. So with that, we can turn it over to questions and go from there.
If you can turn off the screen share, I think that's
sure. Yeah, that's a great way to do it.
So thank you, Robert, so much for
questions and comments.
Yeah. So questions and comments. So thank you so much for the insights and great presentation and demystifying. We've got some noise behind us. Demystifying some of the terminology and technology. And so Catalina and I have lots of questions, but we would love for people in the audience, whether you're in India, Berlin. We have someone calling in from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome, Heather. Does anyone have questions, comments, or a favorite resource you'd like to share? You can just put your comments in the chat box here. If needed, you can let us know and we can turn on your video or microphone. But it's really exciting to think about how the rapid change in technology is both going to create amazing opportunities to make lives and society better, but then also there will be lots of challenges, as Robert said. And I was at a conference 2 months ago where the head of Waymo, which is Google's self-driving cars, was talking, and it's already a reality that Waymo, and you can go online and find this on YouTube, but Waymo has been piloting 100% automated cars in Phoenix for I think the past year. And it's just fascinating to think, like, what does that mean both for people in their daily lives? Because in the US, it shows that 95% of the people, if you own a car, most cars sit idle for 95% of the time just in garages. So what would it mean if we have less private car ownership? But then what would the automation of cars mean for whole industries, from insurance to car mechanics to truckers? But so we have
a couple questions, and thank you, Kai and Wasim and Jordan. We're gonna go in that order. Robert, you gotta work.
Sure. Yeah, I like it.
or you could just put it to Alexa and see what Alexa.
I have one, so you give it a shot.
Okay, at some point, if you could do like a little Alexa test, but
sure.
Knock jokes. So Kai, thanks you very much. Robert, so do I. How can we make sure the tech dividends of artificial intelligence are best shared among members of society and not just the super duper corporations?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and thinking just about the economics behind it. Why do these tech companies create these artificial intelligence? It's to gain competitive advantage. So how can we do it? By forcing them to do it, to be honest. I would say, legislation and laws are probably the best things to, avoid super corporations. And that's, one of the main things in the US here. We trying to prevent monopolies from happening. But as you pointed out, if a company were to create, super AI, they would control a large portion of the market, and it could, lead to, these dystopian futures that we always see on media. So that's a tough question to answer. I would say definitely it would be more on the legislative side of things, because I don't think companies will do it themselves. Though one thing I do want to point out is kind of a sidebar. I can't remember if it was BMW or Audi, or no, I think it was actually Volkswagen. Volkswagen created the seatbelt, and then they gave away the patent, and they let all the car companies use the seatbelt. So that's one case of a corporation, just seeing something that's so beneficial to society that sharing it is really the best course of action. And so hopefully, these corporations, have a heart somewhere in there. But to be honest, my point of view, I don't necessarily see that happening, mainly because of the economic driving factors.
I would also add, not being Robert and an engineer, so take my thing with a grain of salt, but the legislative side has also bring me back to the power of the consumer. As consumers, we have the power to decide who to purchase from and also who to vote for. So that's a little bit of what I can do. But we have a lot of questions.
And please keep them coming. We'll get to all of them.
Well, so Wasim asked, having said all that, Robert, do you think the concept of universal basic income is very relevant?
And Robert, if you can just explain, or I can explain, what is universal basic income, as you answer the question.
Sure. Yeah. So I give my take. Craig, please correct me. Here, you definitely have more context on that. So at bare bones, universal basic income is no matter what you do, no matter, who you are, you get a set income every, month, week, whatever pay period the government would set. And people say that is a great way to, kind of avoid this, I guess, the automation trend of people losing their job. And my views on it, I definitely think it's an exciting thing to experiment and to try. I believe there are a couple experiments, one I think going on in San Francisco, and then a couple in Scandinavian countries. And I would love to see if those work. And I'd say if it works, we should definitely give it a try. So yeah, that's my perspective.
And I would just add very quickly, so, some people are forecasting that within, Robert said maybe 20 years that the rapid change will happen to employment. So there are doomsday forecasts of people saying the era of employment for most people, where they'll have jobs, may disappear. And other people are saying, actually, nothing's going to change. There's going to be new jobs created. We just don't know what they're going to be. But for the people on the more doomsday end, they're basically saying, what's going to happen to society if lots of people don't have gainful employment? Both like, how are people going to support themselves, but what are people going to do with their times? And, so if everyone has, in the US, they're saying maybe $1,000 a month. It depends on the country. But if everyone has a basic income, at least they know they're not going to starve and they'll be able to do productive things. And some people are saying the way to finance this is almost put on a tech tax. So as jobs become increasingly automated, let's tax those profits and use that for people. And one of the big advocates for universal basic income is Chris Hughes, one of the, I think, co-founders of Facebook. He's got a whole agenda, came out with a book on this. And there's a presidential candidate from in the US, Andrew Yang, who used to run Venture for America. It's a great kind of fellowship program to look at for people in startups. And his whole campaign, he's got a great website, just came out with the book, is like, we have to have a universal basic income. So you can find lots of great resources online.
And I think we also would have to land this discussion as it is pertinent in global southern countries. And I know there's people that we are in Medellin, there's people in India, and we really also need, I don't have the answer for that, but how do we root this discussion, even if it feels like it's not going to happen in Colombia? People, no one in policy level, there's doesn't appear in the media, but I think it's never too early to start preparing these questions.
So one point to say, I was at a session at the World Bank a couple of years ago. There's a great organization called Give Direct. Their whole model is that the international development system is broken, and the best way to help people in poor countries is to give them money, no strings attached. So like universal basic income in developing countries, and Google's giving them money, Chris Hughes, and they're piloting mostly in East Africa, so I think Rwanda, Kenya, and they've got very sophisticated methodology, and they go into communities, and I forgot the amount, maybe it's $100 a month, and they're doing randomized control studies, and basically saying, like, if you give people who are poor extra income, they're not going to waste it on stupid things like that a lot of people stereotype. They're going to use it to make their lives better and generate more income. So what that means for people in our field is, like, what's going to happen as if this becomes more popular to how development happens, because maybe it's not about technical expertise and little people. Maybe it's about just giving people resources.
Cash transfer.
So really look up Give Direct and cash transfer. It's changing. Cash transfer is only about 6% of all humanitarian aid, I think. But some people are saying we don't need to give all these resources. If we give money to people to spend in local economies, it's much better.
So next question is from Jordan. As a recent graduate from a master's program in the social field, how would you suggest we catch up, so to say, with the rapid growth of technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, this webinar and doing all of these activities is a great way to get caught up and get your toes wet. And I definitely feel you should follow what you're interested in. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun. So this is a great way to kind of figure out, like, oh, this is kind of interesting to me, or maybe this just wasn't your cup of tea. That's totally fine. So getting your toes wet, finding these webinars or reading a couple articles, and then maybe deep diving into things you're passionate about. I think that's a great way to catch up or to stay with the rapid growth of technology.
And a perfect follow-up question from Heather. What kinds of non-degree or boot camps would you suggest? And I would ask this to you, Robert, but also to Craig. Yeah. Would you suggest universities offer and students seek out? And then the next question that she has too is a little bit different. What are some exciting uses for Alexa with education? I love that question.
Yeah. So I can definitely speak to the technology side of things, because so I'm getting my master's degree at Georgia Tech, and I'm actually getting that online. And so that's a totally online degree. It's very reasonably priced, and it's all through Udacity, which is a very common, course sharing website. So definitely, if you want to get more into the technical side of things, I would suggest, taking, programming 101, and then eventually progressing into something we call algorithms and data structures. That's a great way to, understand how we, as engineers think about problems. And then what else? Oh, and then what exciting uses for Alexa with education? So I can actually talk about this now. We just released an Alexa for Kids. It's totally I guess safe. And what I mean by that is, if a child asks a profanity question or things like that, Alexa won't respond, which is good, and she'll play correct music. And so as far as education goes, asking her questions. And then there's also third-party skills. I haven't had a chance to explore too much into the educational side of things, but there are third-party skills, and I'm sure there are some out there that will help you like learn a fact of the day or word of the day. I know I use Alexa sometimes to play Jeopardy. You could ask her to play Jeopardy, and it's just basically a trivia game, and that's a kind of a fun way to learn a little bit more.
Have you heard of anything like among the companies that are making devices like Alexa, basically Apple, Google, and Amazon? Is there almost like a race to see who can get their products in the classroom, or that's like the vision that every classroom might have? Yeah. Okay,
I just banned his question.
That's too much of a technical question.
It's okay. But I do have a comment about Alexa and education, which I think it's a good way to sort of connect it to what does it mean for social change. But we have a 7-year-old kid who is already so immersed in technology as it is. And if we were to have him use Alexa for his research, like when we were growing up, books were the only source of research. Encyclopedias, la enciclopedia de los niños. We had the kids' encyclopedia. But one of the things is like how do we prepare a society where more and more they're gonna get the answers through technology, and like what's gonna happen with like flipping through a page and reading books. I don't know if we have an answer to that, but that's certainly an implication of like, everything he consumes in his information is through a TV, through a tablet, and he still uses books and writes in notebooks, but it's almost like it doesn't come as natural anymore.
Yeah. And so before I joined, I guess any company, while I was in university, I worked at a library. And one of the really cool things about working in a library is, you have to put books back because people check them out. And I used to love just putting books back and then looking at the books next to them and just be like, diseases from, Europe, and just opening up and reading a couple pages. Those sort of self-discoveries is very hard to do with Alexa, because you don't have, these tertiary, articles right next to each other. And so it is a challenge. I think you're exactly right. I'm not sure what the answer is. Maybe it could be introducing just random topics a little bit more, because that's something that sparked my interest as I was, putting away books or, reading an encyclopedia, the entry before, the entry after of the entry you're looking for.
So just one comment, then I want to talk about the boot camp question. So when I was doing all my university up until PhD, we'd have to look at little card catalogs and go find journals and books. And
we're old people.
And so at the same time, I'd spend hours browsing the stacks, just finding interesting things. And now if I can't get an article at a click of a button, I don't want to look for it. So going back to Heather's question about boot camps, so just some suggestions. One, there is a lot of open source things you can find. So you just search courses or MOOCs, which are massive open online courses from places like edX, Udacity, Coursera, and there's other providers. Like you can find a lot for free, or sometimes they might charge if you want a certificate. So you can find classes in programming and artificial intelligence, and you can even get increasingly employers in the tech sector are recognizing the validity of this type of learning. So you can even get certificates that employers would value. Maybe it costs $500,000. I'm on the board of Tech Change. They also do advertise with PCDN, but they've got great courses like artificial intelligence for international development or blockchain. So I think they're very high quality. Some universities are starting to offer these courses. Then there's all the coding boot camps out there, like the General Assemblies and Iron Yard. You can find a lot of boot camps. Some of them charge a lot of money, some don't. And then one area, Robert might have some insights, there's a real deficit of data scientists in the world. So there's a whole bunch of offerings I've seen, like data science fellowships or even free data science degrees, because companies are so desperate for talent that basically you can come out with, maybe not an accredited degree, but like a degree in data science because they need people to hire. So probably like other sectors like that, that you're familiar with data science or other places, you'd say like the talent deficit is so great that it might be something for people to consider if they have interest.
I'm actually on like an email chain for one of those. It's called a data incubator. And I think the one thing that, I wasn't sure about, I guess, is I think you need to have a PhD or even a master's degree to be able to apply.
I think master's, not PhD.
Gotcha, master's, yeah. And then like they basically train you in 9 weeks, and it's fully paid for. You don't have to pay for a thing. And then I believe at the end they even set up interviews for you with these large tech companies. That's a great resource. And then Craig, when you were mentioning those MOOCs, I also found out recently Microsoft and Google they actually have like their own like specialized MOOCs too. So if you want the accreditation from these big corporations, that could be a good avenue as well.
Okay. And I think I really like the next question, Robert, is from Kai, where I think it problematizes things, and when we don't have to have the answers, but Kai, if you're there and want to join in, like the future of work should only be understood not just as wonderful technological advancements, but also the realities that we have, like climate change, demographic change. And I think it's very important to also contemplate all the things, positive and negative, that are happening. Supposedly we call it future, but they are happening. Climate change is a reality that we live every day. Medellin has increased its temperature. I mean, it's just there. It's unavoidable, and it's happening now, not in the future. Same as demographic change. So what do you think it encompasses, both of you, like the future of work should not be reduced to just technological advancements, but everything else? What do you think of that?
Yeah. And so kind of transitioning back to like the presentation. So I definitely talked about the artificial intelligence side of it. And, there's definitely many more problems, and, just, pie in the sky sort of thing. Maybe a good transition would be, all of these truck drivers may lose their jobs because of autonomous cars, but the world is in grave danger. Climate change, all these, large issues that are happening. That could, potentially be like a good avenue to explore and to help solve those issues once, the artificial intelligence solves some other issues. But going back to like, what is the, future work, and are these important? Yes, I would totally agree. They're very important. And I think technology is instrumental in the solutions as well. Like right now they're trying to grow meat. And if we can sustainably grow meat, that would reduce so much like pollution, waste, methane into the air. That could curb a large portion of climate change. So I definitely think those are serious issues that should be addressed.
And connecting this from Natalie, that says new forms of collaboration and co-working that will emerge too. A good example is here in Medellin. There is an organization, the pollution one. The one that has Macaya, and they have installed sensors throughout the city. We do have, like Denver, Colorado, we are in a valley and the air doesn't flow, but on top of that, we had a lot of old cars. There's no hybrid technology, so there's a lot of pollution, except when it rains, it moves. And so they have installed these sensors to control and monitor, and hopefully to create policies to reduce pollution. So that's a good way in which they're innovating using technology to solve a very a public health issue, which is a lot of kids and elderly people suffer from respiratory disease as a result of pollution. And that's not only Colombia and South America, but also in India as well. So, yeah.
So Kai put in the chat box just some good resources on the future
Thank you
work.
for that.
So please feel free to put your other resources. Aishwara asked a question from Pune, India. How do you take advantage of such technology where maybe the infrastructure is not available to support technology, like more rural areas? So basically, I think the things we're talking about, do they have relevance for people maybe who are on dumb phones or have limited access to technology?
Yeah. That's a great question. That's tough. So how could we take advantage of such technologies where infrastructure may not be there to support it? I would say maybe the best thing is to, just do more learning. and maybe just be an advocate for your own community. Maybe you can, bring back some of these technologies to your own community. I unfortunately don't have a better answer. I don't know, Craig, would you have any suggestions?
I'm curious from like your experience with Engineers Without Borders in Ecuador, because Engineers Without Borders does do, it's more infrastructure work, but they do a lot of projects in different countries of, developing world. So any insights from your experience in that?
Yeah. So I definitely talk about that. So the issue that we were trying to accomplish is they had a lot of animal runoff into their river, and their river is where they got all their fresh water. And so we needed to install a chlorination tank. And one thing that we noticed, like in the rural community, they didn't necessarily have the expertise to accomplish it themselves. But from I guess the capital of their state, they had, sophisticated engineers, and they had all the knowledge necessary. But really what it was resource lacking, and lack of, I guess, sharing of knowledge between, the state government and just this local government. And so maybe a more immediate way to help solve these problems is getting involved in local and state governments, and trying to be a proponent of change. Because what we did was really important, but in reality, it could have been done by the government itself. It just wasn't getting done, and so we came and proactively helped them to help have clean water.
And just I think what I would add is we have to be very careful that the world doesn't get further segregated between people who have digital access and the digital have-nots.
Yeah. That's
obviously we need basic health education, social services, but it's increasingly the internet and technology is becoming so vital that some people do see a future where a certain segment of the world has access to technology and access to jobs. And there are people who are not doing farming or more rural activities, who don't have digital tools. There could be this huge underclass of people who are just not part of the global economic system.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting experiments taking place about how do you ensure both digital literacy training and access to people. And so I'm on the advisory board of a great group out of University of Geneva called EndZone. And so you can look up EndZone, University of Geneva, and they're doing work in one of the most challenging refugee camps in Africa and Kenya called Dadaab. And so they are it's called MOOC in a box. They basically have imported shipping containers where people are stuck in refugee camps. Often they're there for years, and sometimes they lose access to higher education. They're trying to take modern technology tools, but with limited internet access, and help people who want to continue learning. And actually even trying to figure out how to get degree, not just learning, but actually get access to degrees. So there's all sorts of interesting digital innovations taking place around the world, but the challenge is huge.
And at the policy level, I know a little bit, but not a lot, about what Colombia, for instance, is doing in terms of distributing Wi-Fi access in rural areas in Colombia through their ministry with the TIC, the TICs, which is Technologies of Information and Communication, and the acronym works well in both languages, to my fortune. But the idea is at a policy level and a ministerial level around the nation to increase coverage. And I do want to also point that the US, being or used to being the super industrialized country and whatnot, has serious coverage programs that countries like Korea could have.
Like 98%.
98% of Wi-Fi coverage.
Okay.
And the US, what is the percentage? I
wouldn't say Wi-Fi, it's high-speed internet access. The US is lagging behind a lot of the industrialized world in terms of population having access to high-speed internet, even in general, or the cost they can afford.
And to Aishwara, you probably know this better than me, the classic example of cell phones replacing the phone calling, where in remote areas there was no cables, copper cables to the traditional phoning, the way, some of you might remember the phones with the little, piglet tails. I grew up with those. That requires major infrastructure versus cell phone towers. So a lot of that doesn't this example that is kind of even stupid to mention because everyone knows that the infrastructure for cell phone is a lot easier to expand in rural areas. But at the same time that this is cool and it's happening, I think we have to be aware, especially as social change makers, social scientists, to bridge the gap between the digital haves and the digital have-nots. We have one more question. I think we have chance for another one from Heather. Credentialing and identity tracking through blockchain. Oh, that sounds like in another language. Good for you, Heather. Is a potential use for that technology. Okay.
And I should say,
I can explain that.
And I should say, India is at the forefront of biometric identification. You know, the idea is like it's like you. I mean, Robert, it's hard to explain biometric. Can you explain it all, or I should try to?
I don't have much background. I assume it'd be like the face example that I gave, or even perhaps, you know, looking at the iris and taking many photos of an iris, and then just, you know, running it through an algorithm until it can confidently say, yes, this is Craig's iris, or no, it's not Craig's iris.
Yeah, so there's really, Aishwarya, that's called the Aadhaar card. And Aishwarya, if you want to get on and share any insights, you can turn on your video. But there are a lot of interesting examples of using biometric, you know, so eye scanning or other ways to verify identity. And in terms of Heather's question.
No, it's not
Heather's
a question.
comment,
it was just a way to contribute.
Yeah. So we'll talk a lot about blockchain next month with our webinar with Luke.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
And one of the most interesting examples, we both heard at a conference, I think last year, there's a great, I think it's a company called, I'm going to have to remember the name, but they're using biometric technology for refugees, because one of the big challenges when people are displaced, how do you verify their identities and how they get access to services? So I forgot the person's name, but he talked a lot about they're piloting it with the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar and Bangladesh. But there's all sorts of interesting examples of how this kind of technology is actually being used in more challenging contexts to verify identity, but also provide access to services.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So we have 3 or 4, we have like 5 minutes left. So Aishwarya, again, if you want to jump on it all and offer your insights, because the experiment in India with the biometric identification has a lot of positives, but there's also been a lot of critiques. Like any technology is never all perfect or all challenging. Or if anyone has other questions, and Robert, I just have a kind of a personal question.
Sure.
You know, as an engineer, you know, often software engineers are kind of stereotyped as maybe not having strong interpersonal skills. Obviously you do. But I'm just wondering, like, for people who are afraid of like this coding and engineering and building things, like particularly for that, say, do-gooders, like what advice do you have for them? Like, how do they break through and begin to know what they need to know, or just kind of not run away from coding and this kind of more hard engineering, which is a really valuable skill set?
Yeah. So there's a lot of communities. I don't know if you've heard of Reddit, but Reddit's a great kind of forum and community. You know, there's a subreddit called like programming, or probably even like CS intro to computer science. And those sort of communities are very like interactive and very nice. And that's what I think is a really great way for beginners to start. One, you know, the easy questions that, you know, I may, you know, but I never know to say, or I never know to answer. Like those sort of easy questions, that's a good place to put them there and get them answered. So starting out in a friendly forum, Slack is another channel that typically is used by programmers, and is generally a safe and happy place to be. Going back to some of the MOOCs, like those MOOCs is probably a really great way just to see if you like it. And I would highly suggest any of the free ones before you even try to do like spend money, just because programming really isn't for everyone, and it shouldn't be. You know, everyone has different skill sets, so just find like what you're good at and then try to pursue it.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, there's no chance that I will do.
Yeah.
I'm aware about this, but I'm sorry, I can't code. I'm real. I don't think my brain is wired. I didn't do it. Maybe the son will. But you said something that I want to highlight again, which was very true, and is what are robots bad at? And I think that we also should not only feel like how do we get close to the geeks also, but what can we offer with our soft skills that could help enhance this technology, that could help not only be driven by profits, but also by the motivation of solving complex social problems. So I think that even though I could never code and I just can't do it, I mean, way past division, I am stuck. But I also feel that I have things that I will, teach myself to learn, and then there's things that we have to offer as well. So I just want to end on that.
And then just, this is, I don't think you can see it very well, but there also are apps. So this is an interesting app. It's called Solo Learn. You can't see it, I guess, because of the brightness.
No.
But it's free. I don't know their business model, but they have, you can learn a lot from coding to PHP to, so that you can find a lot of free apps or other resources. And Aishwar put out, Google's got some great courses. Hendrickson put something out, again, the Reddit things. So any other questions?
No, just to say, I think another thing to highlight, Robert, when we were preparing the webinar together, you told us, like, I want to talk about what I know. I don't feel very comfortable about opinions. And that made me think a lot, because I'm like, all I do is opinions, that's the difference. But I really appreciate your point of view, saying that the changes in terms of employment and societal changes, it's not that we have to prepare in 2019, we won't have a job. But at the same time, like in our reading and stuff, like concrete examples to what's going to happen, for instance, to the law sector with paralegals that are consume these, all of us have seen Law and Order at one point in our lives, where they need the boxes and how computers are going to be able to discern. And now that I know what deep learning is, there is no way that the paralegal profession is not going to end in 2019, but it's happening not only for cars that drive themselves, but it's also going to reach the social change sector at some point, no matter how amazing consultants and complex thinkers we think we are. And so that's a little bit of like, not to cause panic or mass panic, but also to start understanding how these changes could affect and how can we best prepare each other.
Actually, Robert, I have one last question.
Sure.
So as deep learning gets more sophisticated, is there any discussion that software engineers will be less needed because the systems will be, so it's almost like you build such good systems that then the systems don't need you, they just need people to kind of check. Is that part of the forecast, or hopefully not?
Totally. So of course, it's hard to say that, or it's hard for me to say that no job is safe, but that's probably closer to true than I'd like to, admit. So to be honest, my job, programming, if I'm given very, exact requirements and very precise parameters, I don't necessarily need to interact with a lot of people. I just code. Like those sort of jobs and those sort of interactions where you're not having complex or difficult, group dynamics, those sort of jobs are precisely what deep learning and artificial intelligence are there to solve. My job is going to eventually be on the cusp of AI. But the other aspect of it is how often is my job, so clear and concise that a robot can do it. That's very far from, the average, I guess. Most of the times it's very murky, very unsure, ambiguity, and changing requirements, of course. But yes, that's a great call out.
Yay for humans.
No, hopefully you have such good skills. I think you'll be gainfully employed as long as you would like to be.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And then just one other thing, going back to Kata, your comment, I think a really good thing, just us talking about it is a great way to, prepare ourselves and just awareness for this change that is coming. And, if we can have these conversations, with, our legislative or our governments, or just here in our own families, like those sort of challenging conversations are things we should talk about. So I think awareness is definitely like the phase we're in now. So more awareness, the better.
I just want to end with a note. But did you, when Zuckerberg, the founder of CEO, was called to testify on Congress, and congressmen and women, he breezed through those questions because they didn't know what to ask. And I just want to end up there.
And my last request, maybe not everyone has seen Alexa, so would you be open to like a second, like showing what it is and then whatever you want to ask it to show how it works? I think probably half of our audience hasn't seen it.
And thank you so much for everyone for your great, amazing questions. Kai, Kai and Aishwara and everyone, Heather, Hendrickson, thank you so much for coming here. And Wasim, and now we introduce to you
Alexa.
So this is Alexa, and whenever you say her name, she invokes and she listens. And some cool things she can do is like, Alexa, tell me a joke. Oh, whoops. Alexa, tell me a joke.
No pressure.
What song always gets chickens dancing at a wedding? The Y. Hence CA.
Oh yeah, some of the jokes are pretty bad. I hate to say it.
Okay, humans are waiting.
And can you ask maybe Alexa what social changes? I'd be curious to see that since.
Sure.
She says.
Alexa, what is social change?
Social change is an alteration in the social order of a society.
And how about the future of work? And we can end on that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Alexa, what's the future of work?
The future of work: attract new talent, build better leaders, and create a competitive organization. The book released in 2014.
It went for the book.
There needs a little more tweaking on that learning network.
Humans are safe.
So like this is a prime example of like, you know, why I think we're not necessarily super close. So yeah.
So thank you again, Robert, for sharing your wisdom and time so generously.
Thank you so much, Robert, I learned a lot, and thank you everyone, and stay tuned for next month for blockchain, the future of work, and what does it mean to all of us in social change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good morning.
Thanks for all the questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, see you guys.